explosion?
So I think we need to keep our nerve about disposables. They're a highly convenient, highly competitive, highly attractive product that is basically flooding the zone. And my take on them is this is part of the end of cigarettes, okay? These products and the others for more experienced users are just going to completely crowd out cigarettes now, and we will soon we won't be seeing anyone smoking at all. Now it's messy, it's uncomfortable, but ultimately it's not really doing any harm, and it's probably doing a lot of good. So as I say, I think we need to keep our nerve and see the upside as well as the downside with disposables.
Yeah, big youth uptake hasn't really been a real problem. You've been advocating that any youth epidemic has really not been the case. Is this the time when it happens, really?
Well, I think you have to be careful about youth use. There's two real distinct patterns. One I would call frivolous, experimental, occasional, transient use, which you can get a lot of. You know, a lot of kids messing around with vapes, blowing rings at parties, basically being, teenagers. But that's not going to stick. That's not going to be there forever. They'll give up, they'll stop, and it'll pass like a fad. And therefore, there's not a particularly big public health concern about that. There shouldn't be. Underneath that, then, you have the more frequent, intensive use of vaping. And that is adolescents for whom nicotine might be functionally or hedonistically useful. But the key thing with that is that that's what's displacing the cigarette smoking, because those kids would have been the cigarette smokers. So you have two things with youth vaping, something that looks bad but you shouldn't worry about too much, and something that is actually really quite good, which is the displacement of cigarettes in younger people.
Yeah. So when do we see the end of smoking, according to you, if you're going to put it in some kind of time perspective?
Well, we're seeing the end of smoking already, one generation at a time. So we're getting to the point now where people under 25, we're seeing very low levels of smoking, say in the UK, and falling rapidly. So those generations, I think, will either grow up as vapors, or if they're still smokers, they'll switch to vaping before they're 35, they'll quit. And basically no one today who's under 30, I think, will die of a smoking-related disease. Very few anyway. I think vaping is their way out, either now or later. Okay, now it will take longer for older people because the habit's more entrenched and they're maybe a bit more resistant to new technology and everything. But if we all got behind it and we all saw it, the harm reduction possibilities, government, all the agencies, media and everybody, then that could also happen quite quickly, particularly with innovation as new, better products are coming out that are going to meet the needs of those more entrenched smokers. So we could do better if we had a change of attitude, but gradually that population will age, eventually die, and the younger people who are not smoking will take their place. Then you have to look internationally. And then you've got, well, what's going to happen in China, in India, Malaysia, Brazil, whatever. And okay, that may take longer, but it will follow the same pathway. And if we do it well in Europe, North America, Japan, wherever, then eventually that they will follow in those countries. And it's just an inevitable consequence of a technology change. So I see it as a technology transition. Like we see in energy, for example, as we're moving from fossil fuels to nuclear and renewables. It's something that will be driven by sort of underlying consumer demand. I mean, consumers want nicotine, but they don't want cancer, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory, and they will discover this option and they will take it, whatever anybody says.
Yeah. What do you think about the situation in the EU now? That one of the biggest changes coming with the TPD3, and they have the new tax program and beating cancer programs. What Sweden is taking over as chair of the EU now.
Yeah, President.
What do you think this year will bring? Any positive?
Well, I mean, the European Union and the Commission are bizarre to me. I mean, they have on their hands a massive victory for the internal market. They've managed to create, I mean, the TPD2 is not brilliant. There's lots of silly things in it, but more or less it's allowed vaping to flourish in the EU, and it's done quite a good job at displacing smoking. Now that's how the internal market is supposed to function. It's supposed to function competition, but at a high level of human health protection. That's what the Commission is supposed to do. That's what they've got. But they seem to be desperate to declare what is actually a success. They want to declare it a failure. And the result of doing that will be they'll come in with excessively restrictive legislation on, flavours or whatever. They'll start slapping taxes on, and the effect is obvious. There will be more smoking than there would otherwise have been, and there will be the development of illicit trade, DIY, workarounds and all the rest of it that will undermine the effect of the legislation, undermine the efficiency of the internal market, and create unwanted consequences. You know, people will stop buying oil-based flavours and putting them in vapes and getting very ill. And that's what happens when you don't have a properly regulated market in the interests of consumers, rather than trying to stop consumers doing something.
Yeah. How bad is the black market for, say, disposables going to get if we get too high of a tax and stuff like that? Do you think?
Well,
is there?
I think the demand, if the demand is there, the demand will be met, and the more restrictions you put in place and the higher taxes you put on board, the bigger the black market will be. It's as simple as that. The means to supply, they're easy to supply. There's plenty of suppliers. There's plenty of profit to be made from it if you avoid a tax. So I think that is in the gift of regulators. They can take a choice. They can either have low levels of tax and regulation that's focused on the interests of consumers rather than focusing on deterring consumers. And if they do that, they'll have a much smaller black market in illegal vapes. They'll be much easier to control.
Super. Yes, I think we're
okay.
We're done with that.
You got everything?
Thank you very much.